Single series number 11, Mr. and Mrs. Beans, October 1939, published by United Features Syndicate. This comic was on the newsstands alongside Marvel Comics number 1 and Superman number 2. Robert Dickey was born in Marshall, Michigan in 1861. Dogs feature prominently in his newspaper strips Mr. and Mrs. Beans, Buster Beans, and Bucky and His Pals, which appeared in the 1930s. He also did dog cartoons for Life magazine from 1914 to 30 and various illustrations for advertising. He died in 1944. This issue features Mr. and Mrs. Beans, written and drawn by Robert Dickey, as well as his strips Bucky and His Pals and Buster Beans, which take up the entire issue. Crackajack Funnies, number 16, October 1939, published by Dell Comics. This issue went on sale August 24th, 1939. The editor at Dell was Oscar Lebec. There's a Mile High Pedigree copy of this book, as well as a Davis Crippen D Pedigree copy. And this comic was on the newsstands alongside Marvel Comics number 1 and Superman number 2. Don Winslow is featured on the cover, as well as in a 4-page comic strip. Red Ryder appears in 4 pages, and Tarzan is featured in a 2-page strip. Action Comics, number 17, October 1939, published by DC Comics. This was only the 6th Superman cover of this title, and it came from the talented hands of Joe Shuster, the creator. The evil Ultra-Humanite makes an early appearance in this issue. Marco Polo feature comes to an end. Joe Shuster, Fred Guardineer, Bernard Bailey, and Bob Kane provide interior art. This issue went on sale August 24th, 1939. Vincent Sullivan was the editor at this time at DC Comics. There is a Rockford Pedigree copy of this book. This comic was on the newsstands alongside Marvel Comics number 1 and Superman number 2. This is a very early appearance of Superman, and the popularity of this book made this the number 1 best-selling comic on the newsstands month to month. And the only thing that overshadowed it in sales this month was Superman appearing in his own book, Superman number 2. Superman is featured on the cover drawn by Joe Shuster in a soldier and tank cover. The Return of the Ultra-Humanite is the title of the 13-page Superman story from Siegel and Schuster. And the story features Clark Kent as Superman, an unnamed George Taylor, and the Ultra-Humanite. Superman struggles to keep the Ultra-Humanite from his campaign to terrorize and blackmail Deering lines or sabotage every steamer of their company. The last panel of the story was an illustrated ad for New York World's Fair Comics for 1939. Pep Morgan is a 6-page story written by Gardner Fox with art by Fred Guardineer under the alias Gene Baxter. The Cult of the Tiger Part 1 is the title of the 6-page Clip Carson strip written by Bill Finger with art by Bob Kane. The Return of the Gora Part 1 is the title of the 10-page Tex Thompson strip drawn by Bernard Bailey, featuring the villain the Gora. Sportettes is a half-page strip drawn by Sheldon Moldoff, featuring Peter Song, a horse, and George Veroff in this sports strip. Autographs of Adam and Eve and of Judas Iscariot is the title of the 1-page Fantastic Facts strip drawn by George Papp. It includes the autographs of Adam and Eve and Judas Iscariot, an unmarked grave, a strange beast, and the elephant. The Pearl of Ophir is the title of the 11-page Zatara Master Magician strip written by Gardner Fox with art by Fred Guardineer. Super Comics number 17, October 1939, published by Dell Comics. This issue went on sale September 8th, 1939. There is a Dell file copy of this book. The editor at Dell at this time was Oscar Lebec. This comic was on the newsstands alongside Marvel Comics number 1 and Superman number 2. Dick Tracy is featured on the cover, drawn by Chester Gould, and Dick Tracy is featured in a 4-page detective story written and drawn by Chester Gould. Milt Caniff writes and draws a 4-page Terry and the Pirate story. Comics on Parade, number 19, October 1939, published by United Features. Little Abner's featured on the cover and in 5 pages of strips. We also get Tarzan and Captain and the Kids as highlights of this issue, and this issue is on the stands alongside Marvel Comics number 1 and Superman number 2. Feature Comics number 25, October 1939, published by Quality Comics. The Clock is featured on the cover in this early superhero cover. The editor at this time at Quality Comics was Ed Cronin. This comic was on the newsstands alongside Marvel Comics #1 and Superman #2. The Clock and Mickey Finn are both featured on the cover with art by Ed Cronin. The Hedron Goldmine Mystery Part 1 is the title of a 9-page Charlie Chan story written and drawn by Alfred Andriola, and this is an early appearance of Charlie Chan in comic books. Captain Fortune is the name of the 4-page story written and drawn by Vernon Henle in this historical strip featuring the first appearance of Tyrone Fortune as Captain Fortune and the first appearance of the villain Michael Severish. Rube Goldberg's Sideshow is a 2-page story written and drawn by Rube Goldberg featuring humor strip reprints. The Parker Gang is the title of the 5-page The Clock strip written and drawn by George Brenner in his early superhero strip featuring Brian O'Brien as the Clock, plus the first appearance of Morton as the villain and the Parker Gang. About exactly what happened on this historic Merkel play is the interesting title of the 1-page strip They're Still Talking. It's sports-themed about Fred Merkel and the 1908 Cubs-Giants series Mistake Game. Ace Comics #31, October 1939, published by David McKay Publications. This issue features the Fantom, Blondie, Crazy Cat, Prince Valiant, and many more. This comic was on the newsstands alongside Marvel Comics #1 and Superman #2. The Cats and Jammer Kids are featured on the cover, drawn by Joe Musial. Jungle Jim is a 4-page story, drawn by Alex Raymond. Prince Valiant is back in 4 pages, drawn by Hal Foster. And Lee Falk writes 4 pages of The Fantom with art by Ray Moore in this classic adventure/jungle/superhero strip. Detective Comics #32, October 1939, published by DC Comics. This key book features the 6th appearance ever of Batman. It's an early Golden Age Batman who is a bit different from the later character in many respects. Not only does he use a gun in this issue, but he shoots 2 villains while they're sleeping. Overstreet calls it the first time a costumed hero used a gun in comic books. The cover art is by Fred Guardineer. There's a Billy Wright pedigree copy of this book. This comic was on the newsstands alongside Marvel Comics #1 and Superman #2. This issue went on sale August 30th, 1939. The editor at this time at DC was Vincent Sullivan. The Batman, alias Bruce Wayne, is featured on the crime cover by Fred Guardineer, which also features policemen and a Thompson submachine gun. Batman vs. the Vampire Part 2 is the title of the 10-page Batman strip, written by Gardner Fox with art by Bob Kane and backgrounds by Sheldon Moldoff. This early superhero strip features Bruce Wayne as Batman, as well as Julie Madison, the death of the villain The Monk, and the first appearance and death of the vampire villain Della. Reaching hungry with Julie, the Batman runs into another vampire who wants to make a deal with him. If he shows him the monk's hideout, will he kill him? The story would later be reprinted in DC 100-page Super Spectacular #14 in 1973. This story features the Batarang, the Bat Gyro, gas capsules, utility belts, vampires, and werewolves. Batman shoots and kills all the vampires in the monk's hideout, and the storyline is continued from the last issue. Odds and Ends is a 1-page story written and drawn by Sheldon Moldoff. Spy returns in 6 pages from writer Jerry Siegel with art by Mart Bailey, featuring the characters Bart Regan and Rhett Jen. Vanishing Gems is a 2-page text story written by Gardner Fox under the alias Paul Dean. The Skull Face Cult is the title of the 6-page Speed Saunders Ace Investigator strip drawn by Fred Guardineer. And Slam Bradley returns in a 13-page strip from Siegel and Schuster in their classic detective mystery strip. The Funnies, #36, October 1939, published by Dell Comics. This book features a John Carter of Mars cover and story drawn by John Coleman Burroughs. It's an early science fiction comic book cover featuring John Carter and a Martian. This issue went on sale September 15th, 1939. The editor at this time at Dell Comics was Oscar Lebec. This comic was on the newsstands alongside Marvel Comics #1 and Superman #2. Alley Oop is featured in a 6-page story written and drawn by V.T. Hamlin in this fun science fiction strip. And John Carter of Mars appears in a 4-page strip based on an original story by Edgar Rice Burroughs with new adaptation from John Coleman Burroughs, who also did the artwork. Dick Tracy appears in a 3-page text story drawn by Chester Gould. Legs Diamond is the title of the Crime Busters 4-page story drawn by Al McWilliams, which is copyright by Stephen Schlesinger. The Shaggy Man is Showing Our Friends the Way to the Emerald City is the title of the 4-page The Wonderland of Oz strip, based on the original story by L. Frank Baum and adapted by Walt Spouse, who wrote and drew this strip. A supernatural strip based on the classic novel The Patchwork Girl of Oz by L. Frank Baum from 1913. And Mr. District Attorney appears in a 4-page story, copyright Phillips H. Lord, with art possibly by Irwin Hess, based on the popular radio show. Tip Top Comics number 42. October 1939, published by United Features Syndicate. The Captain and the Kids are featured on the cover. There is a mile-high pedigree copy of this book from the Edgar Church collection. Ella Cinders, Tarzan, Lil Abner, Jim Hardy, and many others appear in this issue. This is the best-selling non-superhero comic book title on the newsstands each month. Super and very popular. This comic was on the newsstands alongside Marvel Comics number 1 and Superman number 2. King Comics number 42, October 1939, published by David McKay Publications. The editor at this time at David McKay was Ruth Plumley Thompson, credited under the alias Joe King. This comic was on the newsstands alongside Marvel Comics number 1 and Superman number 2. The cover is drawn by Joe Musial and features Popeye and Sweepy. Thimble Theater is a 4-page strip from writer E.C. Cigar with art by Doc Winner, featuring Popeye, Sweepy, and Pappy, and is reprinted from the Thimble Theater Sundays at King Features from late 1938. Flash Gordon appears in a 4-page story written by Don Moore with art by Alex Raymond in this early adventure science fiction strip featuring Flash Gordon, Dale Arden, and Hans Zarkov, reprinted from the Flash Gordon Sundays at the King Features Syndicate from late 1938. The Kingdom of Canada is a 1-page text article about stamp collecting written by Eugene L. Pollock. Sport Features is a 1-page strip with a sports theme drawn by Jack Burnley. Brick Bradford is 4 pages written by William Ritt with art by Clarence Gray in this early classic science fiction strip, reprinted from the Brick Bradford Sundays at the King Features Syndicate from late 1938. Mandrake the Magician returns in 4 pages written by Lee Falk with art by Phil Davis in their early adventure supernatural superhero story featuring Mandrake, Lothar, and Professor Thursby, reprinted from the Mandrake Sundays at the King Features Syndicate from late 1938. And Radio Patrol is a 4-page story written by Eddie Sullivan with art by Charlie Schmidt, based on the Radio Patrol Sundays at the King Features Syndicate from late 1938. Adventure Comics number 43, October 1939, published by DC Comics. This issue went on sale September 3rd, 1939. The editor at this time at DC was Vincent Sullivan. This is the first all-color issue of Adventure Comics, and this issue was on the newsstands alongside Marvel Comics number 1 and Superman number 2. There's a mile-high pedigree copy of this book from the Edgar Church collection. The cover art is by Fred Guardineer. The Sandman appears in his 5th appearance ever in comic books in a 6-page story called Island Uprising. It's written and drawn by Burt Christman. It's an early superhero title for DC featuring Wesley Dodds as the Sandman, plus the first appearance and death of the villain Red Hatch. The Sandman rescues a girl from natives on an isle in the South Seas, then prevents the massacre of her father and his party. The Deadly Cough Medicine is the title of the 4-page Federal Men story written by Jerry Siegel with art by Wayne Boring in the detective mystery, which features the first appearance and death of Fisher. The Poor Fish is the title of a 2-page story for Professor Doolittle, written and drawn by Bob Kane. Don Coyote is a 2-page story written and drawn by Fred Schwab under the alias Stockton. It's the last installment of the Don Coyote strip. Rusty and His Pals is 4 pages, written and drawn by Bob Kane, featuring the villain Chen Fu. The Revolt of the Pirates is the title of the 6-page Codden Carver strip written by Gardner Fox with art by Ogden Whitney, featuring the villain Jagger. Popular Comics number 44, October 1939, published by Dell Comics. Gerber calls this book uncommon on its scarcity index. There's a mile-high pedigree copy of this book. This comic was on the newsstands alongside Marvel Comics number 1 and Superman number 2. This issue went on sale August 21st, 1939. At this time, the editor at Dell Comics was Oscar Lebec, with George T. Delacourt Jr. as the president, Helen Meyer as vice president, J. Fred Henry also as vice president, and Margarita Delacourt as secretary. The masked pilot is featured on the cover. There is a 6-page Gangbusters strip drawn by Tom Hickey, featuring the character Detective Chief Cal York, and the story would be reprinted in 4-color comics number 7 in 1940. The Mystery of Mr. Wong Part 2 is the title of the 4-page strip, Mr. Wong, written and drawn by Jim Gary. It's an adaptation of the Monogram Pictures movie Boris Karloff in The Mystery of Mr. Wong. And the Hurricane Kids appear in a 4-page strip written by Albert Hart with art by Will Eli. More Fun Comics number 48, October 1939, published by DC Comics. This issue went on sale August 28th, 1939. The editor at DC at this time was Vincent Sullivan. There's a mile-high pedigree copy of this book from the Edgar Church collection. This comic was on the newsstands alongside Marvel Comics number 1 and Superman number 2. The cover art is by Craig Fussell. Boxcar Tourist is a 5-page story written and drawn by Fred Schwab, featuring the first appearances of Dusty, Jake, and Sourpuss Malone, and this is the only appearance of the Boxcar Tourist strip. Radio Squad appears in 6 pages from the team of Siegel and Schuster. Ginger Snap returns in 2 pages from writer-artist Bob Kane. And Buccaneer is a 5-page story from writer-artist Bernard Bailey, featuring the villain Dr. Killman. Mickey Mouse Magazine, Volume 5, Number 1. October 1939, published by Western Publishing. This issue went on sale September 15th, 1939. Black Pete and Officer Duck are featured on the cover and in a story. Autograph Hound is featured in a story. Robinson Crusoe begins in this issue. And this comic was on the newsstands alongside Marvel Comics number 1 and Superman number 2. Famous Funnies, number 63, October 1939, published by Eastern Color. The editor at this time at Eastern Color was Stephen Douglas. William Pappy was the president, and his son was the treasurer. The comic was on the newsstands alongside Marvel Comics number 1 and Superman number 2. This was still the longest-running comic book on the newsstands, and it was the second best-selling non-superhero comic book on the newsstands. The Nation's Comic Monthly is featured on the cover with art by Victor Pasmino, featuring the characters Sam Smithers and Pigtails, and it's a Halloween-themed cover. Buck Rogers returns in a 4-page story from writer Philip Francis Nolan with art by Rick Yeager under the alias Dick Elkins in this early science fiction strip. The Lone Rider Surveys Hutch Kruger's Cabin is the title of the 2-page comic story Lightnin' and the Lone Rider, and this important story features artwork by Jack Kirby under the alias Lance Kirby, some of his earliest comic book work. And Jerry Iger writes and draws his 1-page humor strip Queenie.